Glad you're here. You may open your Bibles to the book of 1 Kings. 1 Kings, which comes right after 2 Samuel. And right before 2 Kings. That sounds right, doesn't it? 1 Kings ought to precede 2 Kings. And we are studying from chapter 12. And perhaps we will look at some other chapters, like chapter 13, maybe into 14, but we're really looking at a particular character tonight. And we've already introduced this character, but tonight we want to talk about him a little bit more in detail. His name is Jeroboam. Jeroboam. Remember, when the kingdom divided, Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, got Judah. But then there were 10 tribes, the northern tribes, that went to Jeroboam. And this was all designed by God. We talked about how that Solomon was the primary one responsible for this, because Solomon disregarded God in his old age. He had brought in all these foreign wives. He violated God's commands egregiously, setting up places of idolatry. And so God said this is what's going to happen. And it did. But he did make this promise to Solomon: it won't be during your days that I rend the kingdom. But it's not for you, Solomon, it's for David, right? For his father. But tonight I want to talk about Jeroboam. Jeroboam, the one who would be given the kingdom of Israel when the kingdom was divided. He'd get Israel, as it was commonly known. Or we sometimes call that the northern tribes. All right? The northern kingdom. Right. Now, as you study the Bible, there are names of individuals who stand out because of great expertise, talent, ability. Men that God can use if they follow God and they honor Him, but they don't choose to follow God and they don't honor Him. King Saul looked like a king, didn't he? I mean, from an earthly vantage point, this man ought to be king. That's Saul. Why? Well, for one reason, you think of a king being bigger and tougher than everybody else, and head and shoulders above everybody else. Say that most people who are elected to high office are those who have some height. I've heard it said before, if you have two candidates running for public office, more often than not, the one that's taller wins. Not always, but more often than not. And some think that's just because of a perception we have that, you know, the tall one, the one that's got the broad shoulders, that's more of a leader. And so when we think about King Saul, he had the look of a king. And he could have made a great king. Then we think about Solomon. Solomon had all the credentials to be a great king, and God on his side, didn't he? So here's somebody else that could have done great things for God. And for a while he did. And then here's Jeroboam, one that God selected. Just like God selected Saul, God selected Solomon, God selected Jeroboam. And when God makes these selections, what is He saying? These men have what it takes. If they'll listen to me, if they'll follow after me, but they still have free will, don't they? Solomon had a whole lot of wisdom, but he didn't have the will, did he? I'm not sure that Jeroboam had either of those. In fact, when you would consider Jeroboam and put him beside Rehoboam, it would seem that most likely Rehoboam would be the one who has everything going for him. Now, Jeroboam has a lot of personal qualities that would make him a great leader, but it's Rehoboam who has the advantage, doesn't he? Because Rehoboam is the son of the king. Jeroboam is not. In fact, in 1 Kings, chapter 11, look at verse 26. When I mentioned chapter 12, I meant just in that ballpark, okay? In verse 26, Jeroboam is identified as the son of Nebat, an Ephrathite of Zeradah, and Solomon's servant. So he's Solomon's servant, chosen man for a particular job, and that's mentioned in verse 27. And his mother's name was Zeruiah, or Zeruiah. And in the Septuagint, it's a little easier to pronounce Sarira. And she was a widow woman. She had been widowed evidently early. And of this woman, it is said in the Septuagint, regardless of how you pronounce her name, that she was a harlot. Now, I mention that because Jeroboam is not necessarily supposed to succeed in life. He doesn't have what Rehoboam has. He doesn't have that kind of advantage. But God knows him. And God says, I'm going to choose Jeroboam for a particular purpose, and he can be great. But then on the other hand, he may not be so great. And so the text says in verse 26 that here is how how Jeroboam got on the wrong side of Solomon. He lifted up his hand against him. He lifted up his hand against him. Now, he was the one out here at this place called Millo in verse 27 of chapter 11, who is helping to repair the breaches of the city of David, his father. Jeroboam is the one who's in charge of all those who are compelled to work. And Jeroboam is somebody who has an ability to get the people on his side. Jeroboam's a smooth talker, and he's a pretty good politician, and he is able for a while to show a commitment to the king while at the same time showing loyalty to the people. Okay? And remember, he's going to stir them into rebellion. But now think about this just for a moment. If you look at chapter 11, the latter part of this chapter, just bringing this to recall, Ahijah the prophet promised Jeroboam that God's going to do something with you. He says God's had it with Solomon. But when Solomon is dead, the kingdom will be rent in two. And so he says, he's really saying to Jeroboam, you just hang on. You just stay put. You just wait, because you're going to be the king of Israel. It's going to be a divided kingdom, but you're going to be the king. But you just wait. But Jeroboam was not like David. David was told he was going to be the king. And yet David did not do anything to speed along the process, did he? He waited for God to allow him to become king after Saul had died. Jeroboam, however, lifts up his hand against Solomon. Hey, if I'm going to become the king, let's go ahead and do it now. You see, he's not really a man of God. God says there are things he could see in Jeroboam that could make him a great king. And oh, if he would honor me. You think about how many people in our world today God could use that have so many talents, abilities, and yet they don't use them for the glory of God, do they? That's why God can use those with less talent and less ability if they give everything to Him. Well, here is Jeroboam, who fears for his life, and he goes off down to Egypt because Solomon wants to kill him. And he goes down there and gets very close, buddy-buddy, with Shishak, the Pharaoh in Egypt, who would ultimately be an enemy to Rehoboam because of his close friendship to Jeroboam. And he even marries someone in Shishak's family. And so we have King Solomon having deposed of Jeroboam for a while, Jeroboam's on the run. He's down in Egypt. He's in exile. And then Solomon dies. And so in chapter 12, just remembering what we've already talked about, Rehoboam goes up to Shechem to be crowned king, or just to go through the ceremonial part of it. He's already the king, isn't he? And so he goes up to Shechem, and so Jeroboam comes to him. Jeroboam's been called from Egypt. And Jeroboam plays this craftily. And he said, Thy father made our yoke grievous. Now therefore make thou the grievous service to thy father, and his heavy yoke which he put upon is lighter. He will serve you. Well, he must have known something about the character of old Rehoboam. Rehoboam, first of all, doesn't know what to say. He needs counsel, doesn't he? Because he's really ill-prepared to be king. Rehoboam looks like he'd be a great king, but he's not prepared at all. There's nothing about his life growing up under his father that's really prepared him for king. He is just a despotic tyrant who likes to party and have a good time. And when it's time for him to be the king, he's ill-prepared for it. And so he goes to seek counsel of the old men who say, I think you better do this. I think that'd be wise. He doesn't like that. So he goes to the younger men and says, I don't do that, dog. Put the pressure on. Let them know who's boss. And of course, when that happened, that caused Ephraim particularly to rise up and say, what then do we have in David? Why do we need to be, why do we need to remain loyal to King Rehoboam? What inheritance do we have? What advantage is it to us if you're not going to make our burdens lighter? And so in verse 16, there's that statement, what portion have we in David? Neither have we inheritance in the son of Jesse. To your tent, so Israel. Now see to thine own house, David. So Israel departed their tent. Now notice, but as for the children of Israel, which dwelt in the cities of Judah, Rehoboam reigned over them. Now, here's the problem, though. This is why Rehoboam just doesn't have a lot of good common sense. He's just not very wise like his father. Here it is that the people have said, we're not going to continue to be compelled to work like slaves for you, Rehoboam. We're not going to do for you what we did for your father. We're tired of that. The time is right for a populist uprising. And who's the leader of it? Jeroboam. And so here is King Rehoboam sending his head of the tribute money. This is like the head of the IRS, real popular figure, right? Okay, you already feel like you're being overtaxed. You're already overburdened with taxes. And here comes the director of the IRS smiling big, and he says, we're coming for more, okay? Adoram, verse 18, is head of the tribute. King Rehoboam sent Adoram to the people of Israel, and you know what they did? They stoned him. Now, don't anybody say amen to that, okay? Because I said that's like the IRS, okay? But that shows you the attitude at that time toward these revenuers, right? They stoned him. I mean, they mean business. And so when King Rehoboam heard about this, he says, I've got to get out of Shechem. I'm headed back to Jerusalem. My life is in danger. And so Israel rebelled against the house of David. Unto this day, they never got together again. And so it came to pass, when all Israel heard that Jeroboam was come again, that they sent and called unto him unto the congregation and made him king over all Israel. There was none that followed the house of David but the tribe of Judah only. And then it says, when Rehoboam was come to Jerusalem, he assembled all the house of Judah with the tribe of Benjamin. And so Benjamin is with them, right? Benjamin's just small. It's basically part of Judah. Benjamin and Judah have 180,000, that's 180,000 chosen men, which were warriors, to go fight against the house of Israel, to bring the kingdom again to Rehoboam the son of Solomon. They're ready to fight. But Verse 22, the word of God came unto Shemaiah, the man of God, saying, Speak to Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, king of Judah, and to all the house of Judah and Benjamin, and the remnant of the people, saying, Ye shall not go up nor fight against your brethren, the children of Israel. Return every man to his house. Listen to this. For God says, This thing is from me. Now, if they go up there, they're going to be slaughtered, aren't they? God says, I've already determined this. Remember, we asked the question last week, who was responsible for the rending of the kingdom? Well, Solomon was, and Rehoboam, and Jeroboam, and Ephraim. But ultimately, God says this is how it's going to be. And so God allowed this to happen, and God said there's no need of fighting. And fortunately, on this occasion, they listened to the word of the Lord, and they just went back to their own homes. And so the kingdom of Israel divided, and only one loss of life. Abraham, the finance man. He lost his life. And so then in verse 25, Jeroboam built Shechem in Mount Ephraim and dwelt therein, went out thence and built Penuel to keep those across the river, to keep them in line. And so Jeroboam said in his heart, Now shall the kingdom return to the house of David. Now, that's chapter 12, verse 26. After he did all this, he says, now the kingdom just might go back to Rehoboam. What he's saying is this. I don't trust in God. I don't care if God has said that there's not going to be reunion. I don't care. I've got to make sure that it doesn't happen. Had he not had God who told him, said, listen, you're going to be the king, and the kingdoms are divided, then I can understand Jeroboam thinking, maybe I need to do something. Because the people's hearts may change, and they may turn back to Rehoboam. And he doesn't want that to happen. But if he just trusted in God, and understand that God put him in this position, and God could use him from this position, but he doesn't look at it that way, because he's really not a man of God. Not Jeroboam. Rehoboam's not either. And so he says, now shall the kingdom return to the house of David. If this people go up to do sacrifice in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem, then shall the heart of this people turn again to their Lord. Well, if they're going to be faithful to God, they have to do that, don't they? They have to go back to Jerusalem. Periodically. And you've got those feasts each year that they've got. There's going to be Passover and Pentecost and Tabernacle. They've got to go back to Jerusalem. But Jeroboam's thinking if they do that, then they'll be stolen away from them. You can't really enjoy that kind of leadership when you're always scared, right? When you think, this could be taken from you at any time. But what do we know about earthly kingdoms? You can have it and it's gone. It's taken from you. All right? You never have it for a long period of time. I like it when I hear our leaders, for example, presidents who live in the White House say, we're just the temporary occupants. They understand that. 4 years, 8 years, but then we're out. This is the people's house. But in other countries where you've got a despot, a tyrant, what are they worried about? Somebody taking me out. Somebody else taking my place. And so Jeroboam is concerned about this. And so he says, if they go to Jerusalem and they sacrifice there, they're going to turn back to Rehoboam, and then they're going to kill me. So he doesn't trust in God, does he? Not at all. Then notice what he did. The king took counsel and made 2 calves of gold and said unto them, It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Behold thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. Now he's really not an idolater. He doesn't really care. He's just really not a religious man. But, he thinks about Israel's history. He knows about that. And he remembers what Aaron did. And he said, well, I'll tell you what we'll do. And this is more symbolism than anything else. He said, we'll just erect a couple of golden calves. And that will remind us of our great history. And you can worship those golden calves. And you don't have to go to Jerusalem. Just do that in Bethel and in Dan. Now, those are both historic cities in Israel's history, aren't they? So we'll just set us up some. We'll just set up worship here, places of worship. We don't have to go to Jerusalem. And this thing became a sin. For the people went to worship before the one, even unto Dan, and he made a house of high places, that is, for these idols. He made priests of the lowest of the people, which were not of the sons of Levi. Now, you know he does not want the sons of Levi to be priests. Now, were there priests in all these different tribes? Yes. But what's going to happen? They're going to get out of Israel. Because they're no longer belong. Right? If you're not going to have the proper place of worship at the proper time, and worshiping that which is the object of worship, then these priests, they don't have any more part in this. And so from every tribe, these priests go to Judah, as do other faithful within those tribes go to Judah. And so he replaces the ones who have been chosen to be priests. Priests could only come out of what tribe? From Levi. And Jeroboam ordained a feast of the 8th month, on the 15th day of the month, like unto a feast that is in Judah. He offered upon the altar. So did he in Bethel, sacrificing unto the calves that he made. He placed in Bethel the priest of the high places which he made. He offered upon the altar which he made in Bethel, the 15th day of the 8th month, even in the month which he devised of his own heart, and ordained a feast unto the children of Israel. And he offered upon the altar the burnt incense. He did it. So, here is the problem with Jeroboam and how he caused the people to sin. And it has to do with God's regulations for worship, doesn't it? All right, Jeroboam is scared. He really doesn't know God. He doesn't really care about the things of God. And so what Jeroboam has done is this. He changes, first of all, the place of worship. Where were they to worship? Jerusalem. Later on, the capital city of Israel would not be in Shechem, but in Samaria, right? You remember one time that a Samaritan woman, for example, asked Jesus a question. She said, "We worship in this mountain, but you say in Jerusalem is the place you ought to worship," right? Who was right? Jesus and the Jews of that day. Indeed, it was supposed to be Jerusalem. But Jeroboam, he changed the place of worship. Not only that, he changed the object of worship, didn't he? He changed the time of worship. And he changed the priesthood. All violating the direct command of God. All right? Now, had he been a man of God, he could have stayed on the throne. God would have blessed him. God already determined the kingdom's going to be divided, right? When you study the history of the kings of Israel and Judah, there were some good kings, weren't there? Not of Israel, but in Judah there were good kings. We'll read about some, study about some in this class. And so one could be the king of Judah or the king of Israel and be a good king. But Jeroboam chose Bethel and Dan as the places of worship. Now, Bethel, remember, had a great history. Israel loved to read about Bethel when it studied its history, all the way back to Abraham, who pitched his tent and erected an altar there on the mountain east of Bethel. And so down through the centuries, Bethel, to a lesser extent Dan, had great appreciation among the people of Israel. So the place of worship has been changed. But despite their history, they were not to be places of worship, were they? And then the object of worship, 2 calves of gold. Now, listen to Deuteronomy 5:8. "Thou shalt not make unto thee a graven image, nor any likeness of anything that is in the heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath." Direct violation of what God said to the children of Israel. Do not be idolaters. And so Jeroboam, much like Aaron, made calves of gold. And so he says, these are your gods. And so it has been said that Jeroboam was not so much an idolater as he was an opportunist. And he took advantage of this opportunity to make sure the people remained with him. And so he set up these golden calves, which that's the introduction to idolatrous worship. It's not the first time the children of Israel have been led astray. into idol worship. But God, of course, will not at all bless a people who do not recognize Him what? First and foremost as God, as the only God, as the only God. Now the Israelites were to observe 3 national feasts, were they not? There is the Feast of Passover, which is in recognition of when the angel of death passed over the homes of the children of Israel while in Egypt, and the blood, of course, on the doorpost, recognizing the fact that they are to be passed over. And God honored that. And so there's the Passover. Then some 50 days later you have what? The Pentecost, don't you? And then the Feast of Ingathering, the Feast of Tabernacles at the end of the wheat harvest. Now, Jeroboam wants to keep the people away from Jerusalem. And so he introduces this new system of worship, and he even changes the time when they are to worship. And then finally, he changes the priesthood. Now, we know what God has said concerning who, out of what tribe, are to come the priests that stand before God. And yet, when Jeroboam created his own priesthood, what happened? Well, he selected those of his own choosing. And so he has violated another command of the Almighty. Now, Jeroboam made priests from among all the people that were not of the sons of Levi. Now, he knew that the sons of Levi could not abide this. They're not going to go along with it. And so, in 2 Chronicles chapter 11, in verses 13 and 14, listen to the text. And the priests and the Levites that were in all Israel resorted to Rehoboam out of all their border, for the Levites left their suburbs and their possessions and came to Judah and Jerusalem. So they're going to get out of Israel, and rightly so. And who's happy to let them go? Jeroboam is, isn't it? He doesn't really want them around. And then 2 Chronicles 11:16, after them, out of all the tribes of Israel, such as set their hearts to seek Jehovah, the God of Israel, came to Jerusalem to sacrifice unto Jehovah, the God of their fathers. So what happened? There were faithful scattered throughout those tribes, weren't they?
10 tribes.
The 10 tribes who did not go along with this. And what did they say? We're going to Jerusalem. Same thing faithful always say, right? If we don't like what's happening religiously, we say this isn't right in the sight of God, and this isn't in harmony with the Bible, what do you always do? You go back to Jerusalem, don't you? Every time. When people today come to an understanding, hey, what we're doing religiously isn't right, this doesn't have the authority of God, what must we do? Go back to Jerusalem. Go back to Acts 2, right? You remember Jesus was 12 years old, and he was in the temple confounding the doctors of the law. And his parents had been gone 3 days, but they'd been with a big crowd of people. Big crowd of people. Friends. Where's Jesus? Well, we think he's traveling alongside of other boys his age, you know. He's all right. But after 3 days and you haven't seen him and you're moving along in a caravan, wait a minute. You see him? I haven't seen him. Where is he? Don't know. Oh my. So Mary's heart is sinking. Let's go back to Jerusalem. You want to find Jesus? What did Mary determine? She had to go back to Jerusalem, right? You always have to when you're looking for Jesus. When you're looking for truth. When you're looking for what's right. You always go back to Jerusalem. And so in all of these cities and towns and communities in Israel where you have the faithful who said, we're not going to bow down to these idols of Jeroboam, and we're not going to worship in places unauthorized. We're getting out of here. We're going down to Judah. Sometimes you have to leave a place, don't you, to do what's right. And that's what they learned. They probably left friends, family, loved ones, but they couldn't stay there. And so they made their decision to leave. Well, what has happened then is a dark, dark period in the history of Israel has begun. And so now what we're finding is we have the kingdom of Israel and kingdom of Judah established. But here's something to remember. Jeroboam made a lot of promises, didn't he? Jeroboam made a lot of promises to the people. And among those promises that he made, it's going to be better under me. You're going to be better off under me financially. Now, were the people being financially burdened under Solomon? Yes, Solomon lived and reigned in all of his glory, but Solomon was also abusive to the people who worked for him. They didn't have anything. And so what are they saying? Well, with Rehoboam, they're thinking, maybe, just maybe, we can have it a little bit easier. Well, that didn't happen. And so they put their hopes in a man named Jeroboam. Jeroboam's the populist. Jeroboam's the one who says, look, I'll provide for you a better wage. I'll provide for you a better way of living. But that didn't happen, because what happened once the kingdom was rent in two? They're not the country they once were under Solomon. The financial gains were no longer there. Commerce was not like it had been beforehand. The highest peak, economically speaking, that Israel ever attained was under Solomon, wasn't it? I mean, and Solomon was the one who allowed the other nations of the world to observe Israel for a brief period of time and say, that's some more country right there. All right? We've got to reckon with them. Otherwise, Israel not noted very much for its size, for its financial means, not known much for its contribution to what's going on in the present world, to their world at the time. But under Solomon, a brief period of glory. Well, all that's gone now. And so, you know, commerce and things of that have come to a halt. Not only that, old Jeroboam is building a new capital, and that costs what? Money. Who's going to build it? The people. All right, the people. Don't you just love when you hear these so-called socialists talk today, and they say, well, we need to spend money on this, this, and this, and this, and this ought to be free, this ought to be free. Yeah, where are you going to get the money? Huh? Oh, look at how the government's got it. Yeah, where they get it? We know, don't we? But they don't know. Well, they're going to have to pay for this new palace for Jeroboam. They're going to have to pay for a capital, the capital city. It's not going to be a whole lot better off under Jeroboam financially for these people than it was for them under Solomon. Well, here quickly, let's go to chapter 13, and we're not going to go very deep here into chapter 13, except we want to notice something interesting that happens here. God sends a prophet. There came a man of God out of Judah by the word of the Lord unto Bethel. All right, some time has passed now. Let's just move on into the northern kingdom. They're established. Judah got Rehoboam, and now here comes. Remember, Jeroboam is engaging in all this idolatry and things of that nature. And a man of God out of Judah, by the word of the Lord, came to Bethel. And Jeroboam stood by the altar to burn incense. And this prophet cried against the altar in the word of the Lord, said, O altar, altar, thus saith the Lord, behold, a child shall be born in the house of David, Josiah by name, and upon thee shall he offer the priests of the high places that burn incense upon thee, and men's bones shall be burnt upon thee. Here's a prophetic statement about one named whom? Josiah. All right, that's good. That's good. Good king. All right. In other words, Jeroboam, your days are now numbered. God, through Ahijah, crowned you king. You had your opportunity. It is now gone. And so here's a sign that the Lord has spoken. And what happened there? Well, notice in verse 4, it came to pass when King Jeroboam heard the saying of the man of God, which he cried against the altar in Bethel, that he put forth his hand from the altar, saying, Lay hold on him. And his hand, which he put forth against him, dried up, so that he could not put it again to him. He's just proven to him whose prophet he is. He really is the prophet of God. And then it was restored. And so he calls on the king to repent of his actions And this gets the king's attention, at least it seems momentarily. And he wants the prophet to come home with him. I want to talk to you some more. You're of interest to me. You've proven yourself before me. But this man is a strange fellow, this young prophet, because he rises up here to King Jeroboam, and when the king says, "Come home with me," the man of God said, "If thou give me half thine house, I'll not go in with thee. Neither will I eat bread nor drink water in this place, for so it was charged by me by the word of the Lord, saying, Eat no bread, drink no water, nor turn again by the same way that thou camest." In other words, you get in, you make your statement, and you leave. Okay? Sometimes that's what God tells us, is, "I've got something for you to do. I want you to go where you normally wouldn't go, and when you go there, you come right back after you do your business. You take care of business just as I've instructed you, and then you get out." And that's what he said to this man. And so he tells him this. Jeroboam's got to be impressed with the man's courage. He knows he's a man of God. But there's an old prophet there in Bethel who hears about him, and he wants some more information. And his sons tell him about him in verse 12. And he says, his sons, "You go and get him and bring him to me." And so he says, "Come home with me and eat bread." And the man says, "No, I can't do that. I got to go back home." God said not to do that. And the old prophet said to him, "Well, I'm a prophet too. And God spoke to me. And he said for you to come and eat bread and drink water with me." But the text says he lied to him. Now here's a great passage to help us remember that we don't ever take the words of men over the word of God, do we? "Though we are an angel from heaven preach any other gospel unto you, that which you've received," Paul says, "let him be accursed." And so somebody comes knocking on your door, and they says, "We're from the Church of Latter-day Saints, and we're here to introduce you to something you've never heard before, and we want to tell you about this." Listen, "Though we are well, wait a minute, it came from an angel." No, "though we are an angel from heaven preach any other gospel, do that which we preach, let him be accursed." If an angel of God says, "Come, here's what the God told me," forget it. I'm not going to do that. Not what God told me. All right? And so what happened to this man? He took the old prophet's word. Now, on one hand, we learn that Rehoboam took the counsel of the young men. That was wrong. Here's a young prophet taking the counsel of the old prophet, and that was wrong. So you better be careful, young or old. Better make sure it's coming from the Lord. And so the Lord spoke to that old prophet while the man's sitting there eating with him. And said, you're not going to leave this country. You're going to die. And he said, "God said, Eat no bread, drink no water. Thy carcass shall not come into the sepulchre of thy fathers because of what you've done." And remember that he was killed. At verse 24, he was gone. A lion met him by the way, slew him. But the lion didn't do anything else, did it? Old man heard about it. Old prophet. And the prophet brought him back. When he heard what had happened, there's the lion just standing there staring at the corpse. And the old prophet, I don't know, he seems to feel bad about it now, but he had him buried in his sepulchre and said, "When I die, you bury me beside him." All right. Strange account right there. Well, what I do learn from that is I better listen to the Lord and carry through whatever he said to do. The Lord said, "You get out of there." And when that old prophet came and said, "Oh, I heard from the Lord." I remember hearing the story of a place where one of our gospel preachers was preaching in a meeting. Somebody stood up there in that meeting, a religious group in town, that claimed that they still receive prophecies. This afternoon, the man stood up and he said, "This afternoon the Holy Spirit told me about 1 o'clock that you're supposed to close down this meeting." And so the preacher there is preaching. He said, he just gave him a little bit of his own medicine. He said, "What time did you say? Well, 1 o'clock? Yeah, 1 o'clock. He said, "You're supposed to close down this meeting. Quit this. Leave town." And so the preacher said, "Well, he spoke to me at 3 o'clock this afternoon and told me to tell you to sit down and be quiet." So anyway, you can just keep on playing that game if you want to. Thank you very much.